Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan. Welcome back to the bunker. It's time once again for the vast and ominous Comic Vault. Today's vault was requested by John Ty, who made a request via Super Chat goal. He won a Super Chat goal a couple of weeks ago on the Captain Logan Show. Thanks a lot to him for his support. Let's go ahead and get right into it, shall we? You know, sometimes a fictional character can get mega popular very quickly and for the wrong reasons. Fans, particularly those who latch onto the look and idea of a character but don't actually read much of it, will see an otherwise complex and interesting character is nothing more than a meme, a novelty to be quoted, and not much else. And when that happens, it can be easy for writers to lose track of what made that character great, if he or she was great in the first place. A writer might bring one well-known trait to the forefront and completely drop everything that's engaging about a character, and reduce it to a gag or a stereotype in an attempt to give an audience what he thinks it wants. They'll take a lot of toys out of the box that were made essential to the chemical makeup of that fictional person and leave only the most bare bones, most easily defined shell. I think comedic characters are especially susceptible to this. One could argue that after the 60s Batman show made campy Batman popular, this happened to Batman himself for quite a long time, with notable exceptions. It happened with Deadpool in the mid-2000s, and it happened with Harley Quinn over the last decade at least, until just recently. Which is interesting because these days, Harley is often accused of being just a female clone of Deadpool. And when that's true, she's a clone of the less interesting, more meme-baity, one-note Deadpool. The original characters are nothing alike, except they're both jokey, they're both often presented as anti-heroes, and that's about it. Traditional Deadpool has no empathy, but wishes he did, and struggles to understand what a hero even is, as defined by Joe Kelly. And traditionally, Harley Quinn loves the Joker despite his homicidal tendencies, and is manipulated and corrupted by him into dropping her self-control and letting her dark side run amok. But when she's lucid, she can be conflicted about her criminal behavior, as defined, of course, by Paul Dini. The original Harley Quinn, and I think the interesting and fun Harley Quinn, is not a super genius. She's not crazier than the Joker. She's not the same level of sadistic as the Joker. She doesn't break the fourth wall or know she's in a comic book. She's intelligent, but plays up her ditziness as a defense mechanism. She skates by, taking the easy way out of everything. Is in denial about how unhealthily attached she is to the Joker, and how not at all attached he is to her much of the time. She was never a deeply complicated or fascinating character study, but in an effort to make her appear more that way, and to make her a stronger, more independent woman, in-continuity Harley Quinn in New 52 and beyond, going all the way up to recently, has become even more ill-defined, or even worse, generic and overpowered intellectually. And now, with Black Label's Harleen, we finally have that fascinating character study. And it's done so effortlessly, it's a bittersweet read. Page after page reading this out-of-continuity origin, I found myself thinking, how did we just now finally get this treatment for this character in 2019? I don't say this to belittle Stepan Sedgwick's achievement here. I hope that's how you say his name. It's a stellar meditation on psychopathy and mental illness, another fresh deconstruction of Batman's impact on the seemingly uncontrollable madness strangling Gotham City, a believable slow burn origin that's previously been difficult to make more than a throwaway excuse to give the Joker a crazy hinge chick, and a surprisingly entertaining read. But I can't help but think, and it's partly because there's such a strong command of narrative here, see? It's not that freaking difficult. I wish we'd had something like this all along, updating the origin Paul Dini and Bruce Timm gave Harley in Mad Love for an adult audience ever since she became so prominently featured in comics. Something character-driven that brings Quinn's psychiatric profession to the fore and that gives her a real, concrete impetus for the dramatic change she has to undergo and become so infatuated with the most psychotic lunatic in Gotham. There's a really interesting war of Harley Quinns going on at DC right now, I think, which Sean Murphy literalized with his two versions duking it out in Batman White Knight. And that book was maybe the first, at least that anybody was talking about, to really attack this issue head on. Some of DC's creators seem as frustrated as I am about what Harley has turned into, and this weird glorification of her insanity and this disturbing power fantasy she's sometimes written as. There's nothing wrong, of course, with having fun with Harley Quinn or in the morbid humor she naturally lends herself to, any more than there is with the Joker. I'm not trying to take this material too seriously, but I do want a spark of tragic humanity there. Or we're either just reveling in the madness, or she's just the Joker, but a girl this time. Harleen continues to challenge modern Harley by saying, what was outdated about the original idea in the first place, anyway? Wasn't there something there already, an untapped potential we rarely capitalized on? Sedgwick presses the reset button on Harley Quinn here and says, let's go back and examine who this character was at the start and see if she can be developed into a compelling and tragic character in her own right, as the protagonist of her own origin, not defined by the Joker, but defined by the choices she makes that leads the Joker to become her love interest. He puts all the toys back in the box and plays with them all, never losing sight of the most important ones. Being under the Black Label imprint, I expected a relentlessly dark, edgy, maybe even somewhat surreal book, and I was shocked to get something a great deal more straightforward. It's what I might have imagined from a Harley Quinn Earth 1, and in 3 pristine format issues, it's about the length of one of those. It's a rated R kind of story, certainly. It gets pretty violent. There's language, including F-bombs, but it's not gratuitous about any of that. The brutality and vulgarity always serves the story and helps the book read more authentic. It's the story of a naive but determined young woman who wants two things: to be someone who matters and to save the psychotic supervillains of Gotham. In that order. She thrusts herself into a gritty, sometimes ruthless, sometimes horrifying world, and it has to actually be those things for me to care about what happens to her. And I do care. This Harley isn't perfect, but she's not unsympathetic either. It finds a really interesting midpoint between those two Harley Quinns, kind of like the animated series. Kinda, except that show is a perfect blend of old and new Harley, edging toward the sadistic killer side, a villain whose compassion and empathy is relative to the nut jobs she surrounds herself with. It's a little hard to compare this version to others because we largely live with her before she actually becomes Harley Quinn. We really get to know Harleen and watch her gradually fall in love with the Joker, and then make the mistake that will transform her into Harley Quinn in a single moment, because it's the only thing that makes sense, and is the crux of the thematic question in the book about what madness is and how we arrive at it. But it, too, is a blend in that this Harleen is supposed to be sympathetic and likable, as modern Harley is usually presented. But she's a regular person who begins with real compassion, has ambitions of changing the world for the better, and never loses that, only buries it when she does the unthinkable and can't go back. So it edges toward the human being over the broken, damaged sociopath, and even when she gets to that place, it's compartmentalized. She develops a second personality, much like the Joker does in White Knight, and stuffs Harleen into the back of her mind at the end, just like Two-Face. And just after we see the same thing happen to Two-Face in this book, because it's also yet another origin for Harvey Dent, who this time has a hard time seeing out of his busted eye, by the way. Have we ever done that before? Like, of course it should be difficult for him to see well out of that eye. I mean, just look at it. And it parallels those characters in an ingenious way I would have never thought of. At first, I resisted the idea of doing Two-Face's origin again, especially after all of these characters, all of these villains have been introduced already, but the book really won me over on it. Again, it makes me think, well, yes, of course, how weren't we doing that all along. And I mean that in comparing the two characters. It uses a fall from grace and a falling in love, as Sedgwick eloquently described in a press release, to explore two opposing views of insanity. The Joker's cynical view that everyone is a savage animal, naturally, and are just waiting for someone to destroy their civilized worldview so the real them can get out, just like in The Dark Knight. This Joker, by the way, looks like the Dark Knight Joker, has that philosophy, but his sense of humor is a little closer to animated series. It's a really cool blend. And this is actually a funny Joker, which I really appreciate. And then you've got Harleen's optimistic view, that psychopathy is brought on by the unnatural state of perpetual fight or flight, that's only supposed to be a temporary survival instinct in which empathy is sacrificed for the sake of self-defense. And if that state is maintained too long, like in a soldier who has seen too much war, a person can lose the ability to feel empathy altogether. Both characters lose themselves in different situations. Dent, who has been on the front lines as a prosecutor and DA for so long, he questions his own ability to feel empathy and worries that he was already starting to lose it because of the vicious cycle of sending criminals like the Joker to prison over and over again. And Harleen, who hasn't seemed to be in that fight-or-flight state for any amount of time, but arguably could be because of her history of constantly being picked on and not appreciated, which makes her vulnerable to a master manipulator like the Joker. That is maybe a somewhat flimsy idea, and I wrestled with it throughout the book, but I like the idea of two different degrees of trauma, if you can even call hers that. The result, though, is the same. It all depends on how a character feels about it, regardless of if you think relatively what they're dealing with is traumatic on the same level as what Dent's dealing with, or again, a soldier. Dent comes to believe that Maroni throwing the acid at his face and deliberately transforming him into Two-Face, he has, by the way, pretty much the same traditional origin he always has, is just the catalyst he needs to fast-track him into what he was already becoming. He buys into Harley's theory that he became what he was, not that he was really wearing a mask over that madman all along. He had to transform into it. And Harley, ironically, comes to believe in the opposite, the Joker's glass half-empty philosophy that she's been fighting this whole book, as he calculatingly leads her to. That Harley Quinn is who she always was, and Harleen was just a mask that she wore, and civilized life is just one big joke. Represented by the first two letters in both her and Dent's names, Ha-Ha, H-A-H-A. Side note, that is the clever way to do the Martha thing from BVS. First, it's a realization that reinforces an idea rather than taking the place of the opportunity for change and changing a not crazy person's entire worldview in 3 seconds. And second, it is a crazy person who realizes this and makes a big deal out of it. So we're left to make this decision for ourselves at the end. Is everyone just the Joker, and that person is within us all along, waiting for an inciting incident to let them out? Or can a good person become a psychopath because of a traumatic event? Batman, usually the hero of the story, can't help us this time. He doesn't have any answers for us. At one point, Harleen and Gordon flash the bat signal so Harley can ask him if he believes the Joker can be saved, and he says he hopes they can, but he beats around the bush about why he doesn't kill. He doesn't come off as especially hopeful. It's not really because he hopes the Joker can be rehabilitated. The reason he doesn't kill is because he's afraid of what he would turn into if he did. Again, very traditional Batman. Afraid of becoming, of course, like what Harley will at the end. The book is also ambiguous about it because of the multiple personality angle. Both Harvey and Harleen have to share their body with a psychopathic version of themselves, although Two-Faces are both front and center vying for dominance, of course, and Harleen is locked away in favor of the version that the Joker either awakened or created. Were those personas always there, and is what happens to them natural or unnatural? The book has a lot of interesting and subtle additions and tweaks to these characters, but handles them all pretty traditionally, for the most part. And so, this is a Joker with a mysterious past. He tells dozens of different stories about his past, again, like The Dark Knight, and we don't know if any of them are true. He never tells Harleen anything concrete about himself, and when she starts to fall for him and they sleep together with the camera blocked out, even though she believes he's opening up to her and showing some vulnerability, I never know if any of that is real. Like when he tells her he dreams of honest smiles and she calls him almost melancholic, or if he's just that good at faking sincerity. And I can't help but think that the key to whether Harleen or the Joker is right is in whatever made him snap. Like if I had that, I would understand everything about his psychology and maybe the psychology of these kinds of psychopaths in general. Arguably, her past is hard to call traumatic again, but perhaps it is to her, and perhaps that's all that matters. Or maybe the fact that he was able to make her fall for him just by letting her live when he had a gun on her, and then showing vulnerability after making her think there wasn't a fascinating person in him after all, and then telling her the reason he let her live was that he wanted to see her smile. Maybe all of that suggests there's truth in what he's saying. Because on paper, she sounds like she would have to be a crazy person in the first place for that to even work. But the point is, she isn't. I love that they meet outside the asylum first, and she's scared to death of him because she counsels and then finally falls for him. By the way, the original Harleen Quinzel, as developed in Mad Love, is somewhat messed up to begin with. I mean, she's not nuts, but she's a selfish jerk who doesn't seem real in touch with reality in the first place. She's not supposed to be especially sympathetic. It's very much a cautionary tale. She cuts corners, tries to sleep her way to the top, and isn't a very good therapist. I love how Cedric takes that framework and turns her into a more likable protagonist. One I wanted to see succeed, but of course, it's really sad from the get-go because I know she can't. She's got to turn into Harley Quinn, while still giving her a fatal flaw. Like Batman, yeah, I never thought I'd find a great Harley-Batman parallel. Harleen's motivations are in conflict between her personal and altruistic motivations. God, it is really sad going back and thinking about Batman Harley Quinn, that terrible Bruce Timm movie, after reading this. Harleen truly wants to rehabilitate criminals just as Batman truly wants to put them behind bars. But the question is, how much of what they do is really for those goals, and how much of it is because of their personal insecurities? Batman also fights crime because he's afraid of becoming what he fights, and Harley also counsels criminals because she wants to feel important. Batman has a superiority complex, Harley has an inferiority complex. Both of their hearts are in the right place, but in some ways, maybe they're not so much. And that parallel isn't just something I'm reading into because this is set in Batman's world. It's also, much like White Knight, although to a more subtle degree, a love letter to Batman stories. And even though Batman isn't the protagonist of this piece, it is very much a Batman story, which I really appreciated. He's largely in the background, but he's made to consider his convictions and worldview because of his part in what happens to Harley Quinn. In this version, he creates her too. He doesn't drop her in a vat of acid, and neither does the Joker, which I also appreciate. I never cared for that addition to her origin because, again, it tends to just turn her into Lady Joker as opposed to her own unique villain with an association with the Joker like she is here. I mean, Cedric finally turns her into a bona fide rogue with a classic origin befitting a major Batman villain, tied to Batman himself. Makes her a foil for Batman, like all of his best villains, which I don't think has ever really been done before, and creates yet another new motif in the never-ending Batman versus Madness debate. Instead of the vat of acid, Batman accidentally creates Harley Quinn, and indirectly, not as Batman, but as Bruce Wayne. He funds her research into loss of empathy as an explanation for what creates so many of Gotham's villains. I mean, we've got Harley Quinn almost cracking the code of the madness of Gotham. And as Batman says at the end, he sets her on this path. It becomes a road to hell is paved with good intentions story for both Harley and Batman, not to mention Harvey Dent. But Alfred suggests that while she wouldn't have wound up with the Joker without Bruce's resources, which gave her access to him, it was her own choices that led to her transformation. Bruce says she was a good person, and he can't believe it's her fault that this happened to her. I mean, he feels really bad about this whole thing and cannot bring himself to believe that she is responsible at all for it. Which would, by the way, give those two a completely different dynamic than they've had before if we were to continue telling stories in this continuity. It is, by the way, a little bit weird that we're with Harleen almost this entire story and in her head, and then right at the end, we have this scene where we go to Batman and Alfred in the Batcave, but I don't know how else you do it. I think that scene is really important in connecting these characters up, and it doesn't feel like, in paralleling them, and it doesn't feel like it's forcing those ideas down our throat and not allowing us to do any of the work. Like, I think you really have to have that. Having been in her head the whole time, I think they're both right. She really was trying to help, but she also didn't learn from past mistakes and indulge herself too much in dangerous fantasies. So she is both responsible for what happens to her and a tragic victim. The Joker manipulates her into falling for him, and she's innocent, of course, in his lies and deception, but she has the same thing original Harley Quinn did, only with different motivations. She has a history of sleeping with older men she comes to see as mentors. She doesn't do it to get ahead like she does in Mad Love, but she does have that reputation because of a professor she had relations with in college. She's vulnerable to that because she doesn't have enough confidence in herself. She doesn't grow from that experience, and so she does the same thing, albeit under a long con with the Joker. This is a classic fall character arc, a character who doesn't refuse to change, but can't figure out how to, and becomes worse before she gets better. Although this version of the Joker seems to be conflicted as well, suggesting that maybe there is still a human being there too, again, like in White Knight. It's interesting that that book is about some of the same ideas as this, but here, a couple characters are splinted into a good side to bad side, and he's not one of them. A part of the Joker even seems to want her to save him, which is why she's in this relationship in the first place. And now I'm just imagining Mark Hamill singing, "Somebody save me," but even that I can't be sure of. I love how hard to read this Joker is, and how up for interpretation everything is with him. Now, it's not also ambiguous that I can't have any kind of interpretation of it. Personally, I think the book itself is maybe suggesting that Harleen had a choice, made the wrong one, and proved her own theory through her twisted, ill-advised love story. But like The Dark Knight, there is enough evidence in the other column to at least see the point the Joker is making. And again, not knowing much about him is wonderfully maddening, because I feel like I could tell for sure if he's right if only I knew how sincere he was. Harleen herself is a totally relatable, real girl. I like all the Harley Quinn personality traits that are subtly embedded in this totally lucid but insecure woman. She's fidgety, she's scatterbrained, she's playful, she's sometimes spunky, sometimes nervous, she's flirty, she's bubbly, she's naturally in good spirits, and she uses that as a defense mechanism. Her big personal contradiction is that she's forever optimistic, but she doesn't believe in herself. And that's what gets her into trouble. I wish her past before and beyond the teacher she slept with was more fleshed out. I think I'd understand why she is so insecure of herself and feels like the world is out to get her if I knew more about her home life before college. But I do buy that she's really onto something with her theory, that she ironically might actually help the criminals of Arkham, a place that is never actually conducive to rehabilitation if only she could keep herself from falling down the same pit that so many of them do. I love the idea that Harley Quinn, of all people, nearly cracks the code as to why Gotham creates monsters, that she's integral to Batman's understanding of the criminal psyche, and then she becomes one of those monsters herself. That's what really legitimizes her as a villain in her own right. This doesn't force Harley Quinn to be a bigger, more important villain than she's been before just because she's popular. It just makes a really good case for it by reinventing her in, again, really subtle and nuanced ways. She's not female Joker. She's Joker's psychotic opposite, while Batman is, of course, Joker's heroic opposite. We know how she got this way. We know there's a good version of her that wants to get out, and we know she becomes psychotic while trying to cure psychotics, while the Joker starts as a criminal who becomes a lot worse. And we can't be sure that there is a good side to the Joker at all. And both because Batman steps in and tries with the Joker to stop him, and with Harley to help try and cure the Joker. I mean, I didn't know I needed this fleshed out of a Harley Quinn origin, but I will never look at this character the same way again. And man, do I wish this book had come out somehow before Suicide Squad and that Harley Quinn movie that they called Birds of Prey for some reason. One of the motifs of this book is dark fantasies that should stay fantasies, but that someone like Harleen can't help but realize. Some of them are nightmares, which become real because she's too tempted by the related and twisted fantasies that she's intoxicated by. Visually, these are some of my favorite moments in the story. Several full-page spreads that would make for beautiful pin-up posters. There's a visual, unreliable narrator here. In the dream sequences, it's obvious we're in her imagination, like when she casts herself as Little Red Riding Hood and the Joker as the Big Bad Wolf. But there are great moments where she's seeing things differently from how they really are to illustrate her own interpretation of events or to give us a sense of how she feels about them. Like when we see her in a therapy session, but where the Joker has taken over and started asking the questions, and she imagines him wearing her clothes and she's in his straitjacket. Or when Harvey, after he becomes Two-Face, has a press conference and loses it on TV, saying he's glad the executioners, a group of ex-cops who don't think the police or Batman do enough to stop criminals, murdered Maroney, and sees him out of the TV screaming and pointing directly at her. The art in general here is gorgeous, sometimes incredibly photorealistic, but colorful and always expressive. I'm especially impressed by those moments where Harleen's femininity is showcased. She comes alive because of the specific way she sits, crosses her legs, plays with her hair. This is a psychological crime thriller more than a fast-paced action superhero book. It is really talky, and there are a lot of panels. We have to look at faces, of course, a lot. It reads like maybe a Batman Telltale game. It's impressively visual, considering how dialogue-heavy it is. But as much as it's possible with a book all about verbal tete-a-tete and mental manipulation, I really do think you could just look at the pictures and figure out quite a bit, actually. The panel layouts are varied and super creative. Cedric is a student of and loves the comic form, clearly, and it shows in spades. If Harley has to go back to the big screen, this is, without a doubt, what I'd want to see adapted. But what's here is absolutely a graphic novel, and it uses that form to its full advantage. I especially love the layout with the panels that form a smile, just as the Joker is finally getting Harley to smile for him. That's a moment I'm greatly anticipating, by the way, because I know that's going to be where she finally falls hook, line, and sinker. And that panel completely sells it. I mean, I think that's a difficult thing to pull off, because it's building suspense to that moment all through the book. I buy how satisfied with that smile the Joker is. And, you know, in a weird way, I feel that way as well. It's kind of the book's Face It Tiger moment, only, you know, creepy and wrong. A lot of the best Batman stories in the last few years have been these out-of-continuity one-man shows. Writer-artists with a bold creative vision that make the old new again. Just like White Knight, Harleen deconstructs Batman and his world in a way I've never seen, and can't believe I've never seen. It's filled with fun references that aren't too in your face. This guy loves Batman 89, too, by the way. Harley describes her relationship with the Joker as a dance with the devil, which is great because it's also wonderfully accurate. And the Joker makes a henchman named Bob his #1 guy. It isn't the smorgasbord of Batman lore all wrapped together that White Knight is, but it's a fusion of everything Harley Quinn has been, with Dini's original version pulling the weight. I love the political intrigue and the war on rehabilitating the bad guys. There's a great commentary here on whether punishing or helping criminals should be the priority, whether the focus should be on short-term loss of life or long-term improving a broken system and creating a more stable culture to hopefully create more stable people. I'm rooting for Harleen despite her faults because the city is against her as she's trying to solve the real problem. Just as Batman thinks he's doing. But it's interesting that in some ways it seems like she's at the heart of it even more than Batman is. But of course, she gets in her own way. The executioners want to kill all the criminals. Harvey is tired of the criminals getting out, and Harleen's theory would make it even easier to release villains into the wild, which is why he tells her to stop her research. And when Dent has his accident, I love that he tries to keep being district attorney after he's Two-Face. That's unusual. Even Gordon won't let her continue her research because she wants to talk to the cops, and the last thing they want right now is to do anything to help the bad guys. But the real triumph here is Joker and Harleen's chemistry, the gradual way that relationship blossoms, and the way Harleen loses herself. I need the love story to be slow and deliberate, but I need a clear incident that puts her over the edge, and that's not something we've really had before. That moment she becomes a murderer and loses Harleen is crucial to making this work as an origin for this villain, and not just a tragic love story. I have very few negatives beyond wanting to know about Harleen's upbringing. I guess I'll complain about Bane being in Arkham. I'm won over on nearly all of Batman's rogues being here before Harvey becomes Two-Face, but Bane is a step too far for me. Shouldn't he be in Blackgate? Is he really crazy so much as just a determined mercenary? I mean, I always have this with Bane in Gotham, but like, are all killers crazy people? It reads like he's just here because he's a major villain and like he's in that count. Oh, and for this material, while I appreciate that Cedric keeps it light when it's appropriate, he's a little too liberal with his use of the exclamation mark for such a serious piece. But I mean, that's about all I've got, Bane and exclamation marks. I didn't want to read another Harley Quinn origin. I honestly was not sure about what this was going to be like, but a few pages in, I couldn't put it down. This is easily one of the best Batman books in the last decade, I think. Of course, I'm feeling it, and I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to going back and reading this again sometime in the not-too-distant future. Thanks a lot, everybody, for watching. Sure appreciate it. If you would like to request a comic or a movie for review, you can become a $15 pledger on Patreon. That's patreon.com/geekvolution. You can get on that tier. You can pledge for just 1 month and request one thing, or you can stay on that tier and be in the regular rotation. With as many as I have there right now, you'll get a review every 2 to 3 months or so. And thanks so much for watching. Sure appreciate it. Hope to see you again in the not too distant future in a Captain Logan show or in another of these videos. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Captain Logan. I'll see you again next time. Happy reading.